discuss Jarett's latest novel, Only Americans Burn in Hell, which has been hailed as hilarious, provocative, and unmissable. Jarett is a Turkish-American writer living in California, and he's the author of the novella Ada and the novel I Hate the Internet, a highly acclaimed and international bestseller. And in perfect fashion with someone who dislikes the internet, it is very difficult to find information about Jarett on it, so you should definitely read his novels. Our in-conversation guest today, Ivy Kokoda, is the author of the critically acclaimed novels Wonder Valley and Visitation Street. Wonder Valley won the Strand Magazine Critics Award for Best Novel and was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize and the Southern California Independent Booksellers Award. We have books for sale at the front register, and Jarett will be signing books in the back after a brief Q&A. And so please silence your phones and prepare to be present, and let's welcome Jarett and Ivy.
All right, I'm going to try to read. I hate reading, but for this book, I decided that I would actually try to make the effort of seeming like I cared. Because I feel like when you don't read at these events, it might convey the message that you're as indifferent as everyone else is to your own book. So we'll see how this goes. I'm just going to read, I guess, the introduction, which is not that long and is actually a pretty useful introduction to what the book is, I think.
Absolutely. We read it out loud at the dinner table for our guests sometimes, so I'm like to hear you say, yeah, totally.
See, I should do every event with you. This is much easier. On August 30th, 2017 AD, I received an email from NYU's Office of Development and Alumni Relations. The email was from a senior annual giving officer named Corey, and it informed me that Corey was coming to Los Angeles. I live in Los Angeles. Corey wanted to have lunch or get coffee. For years, I'd received emails from NYU. All of the emails begged for money, but none of them had extended a personal invitation of food or caffeine. Corey's email made me wonder if NYU employed a clipping service to search for media mentions of prominent alumni. In the 16 months prior to Corey's email, I'd lived as a minor literary sensation off the strength of my novel, I Hate the Internet. Some of the news stories about my book's unlikely success had mentioned that I was an alumnus. Whenever someone thanks you for your honesty, what they mean is shut the fuck up. Being thanked for your honesty is like someone tattooing the word sexy on their upper arm. If it has to be said aloud, its opposite is sure to be true. Your face is very stupid. Thank you for your honesty. Madam, everyone in this room knows that your wife is a living grotesque. Thank you for your honesty. Never invade Russia in the winter. Thank you for your honesty. Your prolonged substance abuse is destroying your body, your employment prospects, and the mental health of your family. Thank you for your honesty. I wrote back to Corey. This is what I wrote. Thursday, August 31st, 2017 at 1:26 a.m. From Jarett Kobek to Corey. Subject, meeting with NYU in LA. Dear Corey, thanks for the offer, but I've long disconnected myself from NYU. It's impossible to imagine supporting an institution that allowed slave labor to build an entire campus in Abu Dhabi and has failed completely to redress the situation in any meaningful fashion. Thanks, Jarett. On the surface, my email would appear to be motivated by a principled stance. A principled stance is the euphemism that people like myself, who are mired in the loony left, use to describe those moments when they say or do something that ruins a party by taking exception to a harmless comment or action. I suppose that it was a principled stance. It's appalling that I attended an institution which placed a fig leaf atop global evil, and it's repulsive that the fig leaf was built by slaves. And really, I'm sorry how mixed I made that fig leaf metaphor, but only a metaphor can contain the existential horror of NYU. Also, I am a terrible writer.
So tell me about your book.
There's a way to describe it which is faithful to the plot, such as it is. I think what it actually is, and I've been thinking about this since I wrote it, it's a book about interruption. It's a book in which there is someone who's trying to write a fantasy novel who just keeps being interrupted, either by himself or by reality, and ends up creating kind of a mirror of the moment in which we're in. This sort of hyper-mediated world in which nothing can last, there is no permanence, attention is a fleeting commodity, and it's just chaos. It's a fantasy novel about the Queen of Fairyland trying to find her lost daughter in Los Angeles, written by someone, which is not quite me, but has the same name as me, having a complete nervous breakdown about the failure of his career, about the state of the country, about all of this stuff, about Trump, of course. And it is, I think it is probably the best book anyone has done in terms of a novel in the Trump era. That is not necessarily because it's good, right? That might just be because the fictive techniques that everyone else is using don't really have anything to do with the moment. Like, they're from, at best, 1999 or 2002. And yeah, so that's what it is. And it's full of weird shit. It's full of a million different things and opinions and craziness. But I think, it is the closest I've read that anyone has come to doing a fictional encapsulation of whatever it means to be alive in a world where a reality television host is now the president and we are all beholden to his Twitter account. God. For decades, everyone who had any pretense to high culture wasted fathomless hours talking about theorists like Michel Foucault and Jean Baudrillard. These people with pretenses to high culture had advanced the idea that reading incomprehensible French books gave them special insight into the way the world works. Sometimes they expressed this pretense in unreadable texts called master's theses and doctoral dissertations. One of Baudrillard's ideas was very popular. He'd theorized that there would be a moment when reality collapsed into fiction, at which point it would be impossible to distinguish the fake from the actual. He called this the hyperreal. But what neither Baudrillard nor his readers could ever locate was the exact moment when the hyperreal would replace the real. It was a mystery, floating point arithmetic without any definitive beginning. But then it happened. On November 8th/9th, 2016 AD, while I was asleep in London's Little Venice, passed out in someone's former childhood bedroom above Blomfield Road, the real became hyperreal. Donald J. Trump, the world's best approximation of living fiction, whose body appears to be constituted of media coverage, stitched together with plastic surgery, was elected to the presidency of the United States of America. When this happened at around 6 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, a film crew was on Blomfield Road. They were shooting footage for a film called Paddington 2. The film was about a very fussy bear with a posh accent, its cartoon body generated by computers. The bear goes to prison and makes friends with inmates whose bodies were generated by loveless sexual reproduction. By the way, I don't actually know if that's true. I've only seen the trailer. I did an interview like a week ago with someone who actually has seen the film, and it seems like there's more to it than that. I think it's impossible to look at what has happened even since I Hate the Internet came out, which was at the beginning of 2016, that was a book that was really supported by traditional media and reviews still being able to drive audiences. And most famously got this review in the New York Times, which was either the second or third self-published book that the New York Times had ever reviewed, and instantly destroyed my life and created a million problems. If that had happened now, if the same book had come out and it had gotten the same reviews and it had gotten the same everything, I don't think it would have done a thing. I don't think it would have moved the needle even an inch. And I think that's because the energy has drained out of whatever that is. Like, you can get, you can get really, really good reviews in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and have them not move a book. Like, one of the things about The Future Won't Be Long is that The Future Won't Be Long was actually an extremely well-reviewed book in really prestigious outlets, not the Times, which I think probably was punishment for sneaking a self-published book into it. But it didn't move the needle, at all. It's like that kind of, no one is looking at traditional outlets or outlets of the soft neoliberal left for advice on books. Maybe that their audiences don't even know books exist. I don't know the mechanism. That has completely drained out. It is a even more of a quixotic adventure than whatever this nonsense is we're doing, because you could lobby the New York Times to get a review of your novel and maybe spend 4 months doing it, and maybe they review it. It will have no effect whatsoever. That moment is gone. And the sad thing is that I think it's been replaced by all of the energy going into non-traditional media, and perhaps even sadder, right-wing media. The book that you were reading was going to be a cracked attempt at the sorry bullshit that people in the hyperreal actually want to read, which are mindless tales about supernatural creatures. I had come up with what I thought was a funny contrast between narrative, voice, and subject matter. I was going to write a fantasy novel in the imagined voice of an alcoholic from southeastern New England. It was going to be The Hobbit as told by a gin room rummy from Fall River, Massachusetts. It was going to go something like this. Fucking Bilbo, the little midget over here. He crawls into the prickers, and what does he see but some fucking troll sitting at a fucking fire? Wow, I says, wow, you tell me, guy. What the fuck am I gonna do with some trolls, says Bilbo the dildo. Who am I, a fucking Terminator? I ain't getting myself eaten just 'cause some big shot Poindexter thinks he's a wizard. But life kept interrupting. Things went screwy. It's possible that I had a nervous breakdown. Somehow I ended up writing a novel that is not only about whimsical, undying creatures who live on a magical island called Fairyland, but is also a book that functions as an accidental allegory for a social media hashtag. This state of affairs seems like a perfect statement about the present moment. Corey wrote back about a week after I'd sent my email. This is what he wrote. Thursday, September 7th, 2017 at 11:15 a.m. From Corey to Jarett Kobek. Subject, meeting with NYU in LA. Dear Mr. Kobek, thank you for your response, your honesty, and your candor. Best wishes, Corey.
Okay, well let's get into what we're actually here to discuss, which is this quixotic idea that hopefully doesn't end up being a quixotic idea of yours. So let's start unoriginally at the beginning. You tell me what was the like background work in your head that made you suddenly be like, this is the way to do this book.
What made me think, okay, this would be a really funny idea to try and get onto these shows and just cause a lot of trouble, is that a very good writer named Blake Nelson, who wrote 2 very, very good books in the 90s. One of them is called Girl, one of them is called Exile. They're floating around somewhere in these piles of books. Wrote me an email, I don't know, about a year ago, asking me if I would blurb his new book. And I was like, yeah, of course I'll fucking blurb your new book, you're Blake Nelson. And then he sent me the PDF, and I instantly forgot that he had asked. And then just totally forgot, never looked at it, never even thought about blurbing it, because it just slipped my mind. And then, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, he started promoting this book, and the book is called The Red Pill, and it's essentially a book about, I don't know, like a 40-something-year-old dude in Portland who decides he should go, who's having trouble with women. So his brother-in-law is like, oh, you've got to check out all of these forums about how to pick up women. And the book is just sort of this slice of life where like a liberal dude gets red-pilled into a kind of pick-up artist thing. And, that I'm not going to say anything shitty about Blake Nelson because he is a very good writer, but there was this question of like, why the fuck did you ask me to blurb this, right? Like, what's the miscommunication there? Anyway, he did an event at Powell's in Portland for the book, and it got a little bit of coverage because one of the employees held some kind of demonstration outside it, being like, Blake Nelson is the devil. And that got coverage, and then the coverage linked to the media that he was doing. And the media that he was doing was not left-wing media. It wasn't even like center middle media. It wasn't like soft left neoliberalism. He was just like going on to the equivalent of public access shows on YouTube and like having chats with some MAGA hat dudes. And, again, I don't want to say anything shitty about him, but it's a little disappointing because you have like some Pacific Northwest MAGA hat dude and Blake Nelson, and they're in complete concert. They agree on everything. And you're just like, dude, you're Blake Nelson. Why are you agreeing with any of this? But seeing those videos made me realize he's got the right idea. He just has the wrong project. There's a kind of energy in that media that nothing on the left can even, and by left I mean a very broad spectrum, can even come close to touching. And all of the information all of the energy is on the part of these right-wing dudes. And it's like, had he been in an oppositional position, he could have really promoted the book, as opposed to sort of maybe getting the 3 people who watch this YouTube thing, who read, to buy it, right? Like, most of that audience isn't going to buy his novel, and it's never going to travel beyond that audience, even if it gets mentioned in like Portland's local weekly. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's the wrong project. It's the right idea. And it's like, I don't see much of another option when it comes to doing this, which is like, I have a certain financial commitment for the book to succeed. I think it behooves me to do whatever I can to make the book succeed. And I live in a toilet, right? Like, America in this moment it's the weirdest moment in American history. It's a toilet, and the only real way that you can get any publicity is to go and shit in it. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that I have, the filmmaker Nick Toti.
Yes.
He is.
I don't know him well. We connected through a friend.
Yeah,
and
he is about 2 feet away from me.
Nick.
Filming this.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah, there's some insane idea we have that we might be able to make a documentary or something about the release of this book.
I love it.
But we'll see how that turns out.
I'm happy. I give my verbal permission to be in it.
Okay, great. Yeah,
as
he just pointed out that we might actually be legally obligated to tell you because we're in
Yeah.
California. So
Yeah, you probably are legally on
Yeah.
it. That is a huge cat head. At least it looks that way.
yeah. This is the other thing that will be happening while this is going on, is that my cat has no manners.
I mean, the book is called, I'm going to reference it, Only Americans Burn in Hell.
Right.
Which is fascinating, to say the least, especially for me coming from my background. And then that disillusionment, first started with American megachurch Christianity, then went to Christianity, then went to Americanism as a whole.
Right.
Which I believe is a religion in itself. And some of our patriotism is a religion.
Yeah.
So, anyways, where did it all begin with you? Were you born American, or did you come from Turkey?
No. My father is Turkish, but I was born in America, on the East Coast. But then I bummed around New York for a while, on and off for a couple of years, and then decided that I should move to Los Angeles almost on a whim.
Interesting.
But I was sick of the weather more than anything. And then someone I knew was giving up an apartment, which was like a shack in someone else's backyard that was cheap to rent. I was like,
fantastic.
well, this seems like a good idea. But anyway, just in LA, got nothing to do, living in a shack, and I decided that I should write. And then sort of slowly taught myself how to write. Did a few very tiny projects, one of which ended up doing pretty okay. Moved to San Francisco to move in with a woman who had sort of been dating long distance. And then we were in San Francisco for a while, for a couple of years, and then San Francisco went completely cash haywire. I mean, it had been going cash haywire, but this is like 2010, 2011, 2012, where I think that's when Facebook IPO'd. I think that's when Twitter really started to take off, and you could just watch the city transforming block by block by block. And eventually, we kind of got gentrified out. And like, if I'm getting gentrified out, like if I'm the victim of gentrification, something has gone wrong, right? Like, everywhere else I had ever lived.
Straight white man, come on.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know your sexuality, I'm just guessing.
Close enough.
Okay.
And it, so back to Los Angeles, and when I came back to LA, I was so incredibly angry that I ended up writing this book called I Hate the Internet, which is about 270 pages of bile, just directed at basically the 4 companies that run San Francisco and like the people who work for them. And when I had finished that book, which was at the end of maybe the midway point of 2014, I knew that book would work, and I knew that it would succeed because I figured this is a joke I always say, but it's true. I felt like you could call a blank book I Hate the Internet and still sell a couple of thousand copies to people just as like a fashion accessory. And then if you actually do have something between the covers, maybe, and what was between the covers was very different kind of writing than anyone had done up until that moment about the internet. Because this is before the 2016 election, where the entire society sort of decided en masse that the internet was terrible. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the internet has become one of the things that I write about, which I have almost no interest in writing about, but it's so permeated the culture that it's impossible to get away from. Part of this idea of what I mentioned earlier, which is like people using techniques that are from, at best, 1999, is I don't think you can write about the internet or you can write about Trump or any of these things. And Trump is obviously a manifestation of the internet made flesh. I don't think you can write about those things and write about them accurately or honestly if you're not as stupid as them. If you're not willing to be as totally absurd as whatever the thing is that you're writing about. Otherwise, you're just like an old man yelling at the kids to get off the lawn, right? Like, you have to engage the thing on its own terms, and the terms of it are moronic. But that's okay, because being a moron is really rich territory if you know what to do. And my goal in publishing it was like, I just want to sell a couple of copies. I just want to make enough noise that the next book can be published by a major press, of which there's 5 in America. Because I had this delusion that if that happened, somehow some of the problems in my life would resolve. Which is, speaking of American religion, that's a very American delusion.
It is.
But so anyway, I Hate the Internet came out, and it instantly went psychotic. It just started selling. It got reviewed in the New York Times, very well reviewed in the New York Times, which they don't review self-published books. Fast forward now 3.5 years later after the book came out, and it's worldwide, it's sold about 100,000 copies.
Wow.
It's translated into 10 languages and published in 13 countries, and there's more translations forthcoming. But so anyway, it was like a mega success. It was an absolute mega success. And in the middle of that mega success, and the backdrop to all of this too is that it was early 2016. So it was happening while Trump's candidacy was happening, but before anyone understood this is a real thing, where it was still kind of a joke, right? If the book had come out even in June of 2016, I don't think it could have succeeded. It just happened to get into literally the last moment before Trump just took over everyone's intellectual and spiritual lives.
So do you want to address what happened in between I Hate the Internet and this book?
Sure. I failed miserably in public. I sold a book to Penguin Random House's imprint, Viking, which is a storied imprint. It used to be its own publisher, but it's been consumed 15 different times. That was old work, and which had Trump not been elected, I don't know if it still would have succeeded. It wouldn't have failed as badly as it did. Should I feed him and then we...
Either way. I'll just get some shots of him and
no,
then I can cut to
I
it.
forgot that there's no standard of quality or competence in any of this. So, but the book came out in 2017. Viking did not do an especially good job on it. And it was the wrong book for the moment. I think it came out a week after Charlottesville, and it was a book about drug parties in the 80s, which everyone wants to read after a white supremacist has crashed a Dodge Challenger into a crowd. And it was a huge failure. And it was, to circle back, it really was very poor strategy on my part. I thought, okay, well, this book was a huge, unlikely success. Here's this other manuscript, which is a perfectly good, functional novel. Let's sell that because that's what's around. And I didn't think it would fail as badly as it did. I mean, it was one of the failures of 2017. And B, I didn't think if it did fail, that it would essentially exclude me from mainstream publishing basically for the rest of time. And maybe it hasn't, I don't know, but it certainly fucked me up career-wise. And when I was writing Only Americans Burn in Hell, it occurred to me that this was the single funniest thing that had ever happened to me. That you could not write a book as nasty and as full of complaints as that book, as Only Americans is, if the last book had been a success. Because then, who wants to hear someone who's won whining? It's the most annoying sound. But because I had lost so profoundly and failed so massively, that this was a really smart comic platform from which the rest of the book could spring. You can't concentrate on anything for 5 minutes without, I don't know, Trump popping up or text messages about Trump popping up or any of this stuff. So it's an attempt to do that, to try to kind of capture that into a book. And I also wanted to do a Christian novel.
Interesting.
Because the thing that interested me the most about it was this idea that arguably for about 1,500 years, all Western art was Christian art, right? You might have people occasionally writing things in the vernacular, but from about the time that the Roman Empire adopts Christianity to the Industrial Revolution,
yeah,
all art is Christian art, right? In one way or another. What's interesting to me is that this has fallen so incredibly low, where like nothing sounds worse than someone being like, yeah, I just wrote a Christian novel, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the lowest form of what you can possibly do.
Yeah.
And I always like the most debased things. Like I really like working with things that are so incredibly low and discredited, because there's maneuverability there that I don't know you otherwise have. And it's also an interesting thing to interrogate. And on top of that, I think one of the things about the Trump era that which you know we're really coming to terms with is that as the 20th century and the 21st century moved forward, I think the right learned a lot from the left, but I don't think the left learned a lot from the right.
No, I would agree. agree.
And the idea of figuring out how to do a Christian book from essentially a radical left perspective. Now, I don't think that this, I have, delusional as I am, I'm not so delusional as to imagine that this has solved the problem.
Right.
It's an interesting attempt, right? At like this idea of, if you look at the right, the thing that really has defined the right in maybe the last 10 years is that they have gotten this incredible fluidity with mass media that I don't think they had, right? Where it's like, they could use mass media, but it would be really hackneyed or really overbearing. It wouldn't be cool, for lack of a better word, right? And I still don't think it's cool, but in however else you would describe it. But if you look at like what the alt-right figured out, right? That's all just leftist, like media techniques and media approaches that started on the left that the right figured out how to adopt.
Right.
And like one of the things, like I said, one of the things the left has been terrible at is taking things that work for the right. And one of the things that does seem to work for the right is religion, right?
Yeah.
So it's an attempt at like appropriating, in the most foul-mouthed way possible, but appropriating Christianity to a leftist end. There's always this illusion, right? Oh, you can do it yourself, indie publishing forever. And the thing about that is, there is a certain truth in that argument until you hit the reality. And the reality is that if you are an independent publisher, that's like a seed that has to be planted in soil. And the soil has been salted by the 5 companies that run U.S. publishing. Okay, so let me say this. In 1935, there were no paperbacks, right? And as a result, there were about 400 independent bookstores in the U.S. You could get books in department stores, but in terms of like actual bookstores, there were 400, give or take, bookstores. Books cost, if you were to get a new literary novel, it would cost $2.50 at a time where like a cup of coffee was 5 cents or a gallon of gasoline was 10 or 15 cents. And these independent bookstores tended to be clustered in areas around, serving what would have been the then equivalent of the metropolitan liberal elite. When the paperback revolution happened, and I think the first paperback was in 39, something like that, 37, it really, really changed how publishing worked. And publishing stopped being an industry catering solely to the tastes of the metropolitan liberal elite. And it coincides with, a prosperity boom brought about by the end of the Second World War, but it also coincides with what I think is probably the most expansive moment in American intellectualism. Somewhere around the 80s, there was a contraction in publishing to get away from this model. Some of it was not in the control of publishing, some of it was. What in 2019 you have is, I would guess, about 400 bookstores that serve the metropolitan liberal elite. And some of them, there are a few scattered around, but there is no interest in engaging with anyone who isn't part of the predetermined audience. And I think that's not a growth industry. That's an industry where it's like, if if you're really lucky and you sell 50,000 novels, if you're unusually lucky, maybe you'll sell 100,000 copies of a book. If you're incredibly lucky, maybe you'll sell 1 million. But these numbers have been dwindling as time goes on because the audience has been dying. Like, there's only a certain number of people who want to exist, who want to read what this industry is producing. And it's not their fault. It's that the industry has narrowed its target demographics ever smaller. So serious fiction, you know, mostly is about, I don't know, houses in Maine and involves beautifully intricate water metaphors. The truth is, most people don't give a fuck, and they shouldn't, because who cares?
No book should be a book about an idea, but somehow Jarett manages to pull out books that are about ideas. They should be about stories. But like, you know, you have this amazing marriage. I teach writing, and the thing is, people always come, so first let's do it. Make sure you can do the standard thing before you like tear it up. And I think you've done the standard thing, and the future will be long. Like, that's a book.
Yeah.
It's about people doing stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and then, but in order to be able to do this, which is this fairyland story, well, there's another story too about Dennis.
There's
I can't even say his real name.
He's identified in the book as HRH, mostly, which is an acronym for His Royal Highness. It's a Saudi prince who functions in the book like the monster in a horror movie, where you never, like, if it's a good horror movie, you only see the monster in maybe 3 or 4 scenes, and then each one is increasingly worse than the last.
But you really want to see him in this book.
Yeah, well, it's a character that I came up with that I stuck in I Hate the Internet, but the joke actually wasn't complete in that book, and so it's sort of this terrible thing when you read that book and you encounter that character. He's just a guy who's investing in new media while going into whorehouses and dragging his underlings into whorehouses, and like the joke is his father owns everything. Right. That's the joke, and I Hate the Internet. It's not actually a very good joke. What is incomplete in that joke, in that book, which is complete in this book, is that by day, in Only Americans, he is a neoliberal philanthropist. And then by night, he just goes out and tortures sex workers in this incredibly Baroque way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like torture porn. I mean,
it's sort of an emotional terror, right?
Yeah, like an intellectual terror.
Yeah.
He does some, you know.
Yeah, like there's the only sex scene in the book is the scene where, God, it's so hard to even explain, but I will try. Where like he's hired these prostitutes in Boston and he's also brought an Amazon Alexa, and then whenever the Amazon Alexa cannot answer his questions about the history of Albania, the prostitutes have to suffer. And it's like the idea of that character, which, by the way, this was written long before Jeffrey Epstein became a national obsession, was this idea that the way by which really, really powerful people can hide their depravity is by saying the right things. And like everything he says is something that I personally agree with, right? Like that has to be the only way that character can work, is if it's a character that I completely agree with. And so it's just this way of like indirectly talking about what I think the whole book is about, which is how is anything genuine in 21st century America when everything is owned by the same very, very small coterie of people. right? And this is where the attack on Penguin Random House becomes less of, you know, less of you didn't dump me, I dumped you, and more of an actual metaphor for the entire moment that we live in. I was thinking about it, and you know, Penguin Random House is owned by Bertelsmann, which is this huge German multinational conglomerate that spent World War II using slave labor and printing Nazi propaganda. And that seemed funny too, because it's like, okay, you know, we have this conversation post-Trump where it's like everybody's afraid of Nazis, but the Nazis that we're afraid of are supposed to be deplatforming or whatever. The truth of it is, it's like 15 assholes from Sacramento. Sure, they can kick your head in, but as a legitimate political platform with any real power, never gonna happen. And everyone in the process was you know, at the moment, everyone was really concerned about Nazis or punching Nazis or whatever it is. And it occurred to me that I had collaborated with Nazis, right? Like I had taken the money from a company that had used Jewish slave labor, that had been in one of the corporations that was really a major part of the Third Reich's industrial platform and its propaganda platform, and that, furthermore, this is the pinnacle in publishing in the US and the UK. Everyone wants to be published by Penguin, but Penguin is owned by a private company that collaborated with Nazis, and that there is something so incredibly funny and illuminative about that hypocrisy at the heart of publishing, that all of us who are writers, you know, supposedly are taking these bold stances on Twitter against this shit, but the minute that a company comes calling, that gets put aside, you know. And it seemed like if my career was over, which I suspect it probably is, you know, I'm cruising on fumes here, I'm working with you, that the best possible thing to do was to really drive it into the ground by talking about the shit that no one ever talks about, that underlines the entire transmission of thought in the media. You know, like there's an example in the book, which is Rupert Murdoch, who this story is a little more complicated because Disney acquired part of Fox, but 2 years ago it was a really clear story. Fox News was owned by Rupert Murdoch. So was HarperCollins, which is one of the 5 major publishers in the US. And you would have people go on Fox News, say these insane, egregious opinions, and then writers who had books on HarperCollins would get on Twitter and say some things like, I can't believe this, I'm going to write a book, and maybe HarperCollins will publish it, that exists in exact opposition to these opinions on Fox News, which are in such incredibly poor taste. But the thing is, the same guy owns both platforms, and no one talks about it because no one wants to be out of a job. Being out of a job by accident really gives you a funny position to then just kind of say whatever the fuck you want. The person that you want to be in that situation is Murdoch.
Right.
Because you're making money off of the right and the left, and you're creating this dichotomy of opinion that self-perpetuates and continues to move more product. Like, what, does Murdoch believe anything?
No.
I don't think so. I think he believes in, like, making sure his daughter's house in the Cotswolds is stocked with Arabian mares, right? And the rest of it. I've actually seen that house. A friend of mine, it's a very long story, made very short. A friend of mine was adopted and then found out who his biological father was, and his biological father turned out to be this incredibly rich London city boy So it's like this weird version of the Princess Diaries. And his next door neighbor is Murdoch's daughter's
Elizabeth.
house. And the house is like they bought a medieval village.
Oh, I read that.
That's the property. And you can like look over the fence and just see their medieval village. But yeah, so Murdoch makes a ton of money off of I don't know if it's as much money as Fox News, but he makes a lot of money off of liberal opinion, and he makes a huge amount of money off of conservative opinion. And it's like, that is a perfect metaphor for the world we are in right now. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is like, publishing is essentially dead. No one knows it, but it's dead. I don't think there's any validity in doing what I do. I'm the equivalent of like someone who dresses up in plated armor on the weekend and goes jousting, right? Like, this is nonsense. What I do is nonsense. You know, despite my professions of some independence, I don't even have that option. Like, I've made money from Murdoch. They love to cover me in the UK, you know, and they're really kind to me, but that shit drives ad sales, you know? It all flows up. And it's like, I don't know what the solution to it is, but I enjoy being in this situation where you're the person throwing eggs at the limo as it speeds by, you know? And that's what the book kind of is. No, it's a failure of the left. It's not that the right-wing media has anything really to offer. There's no ideas there. There's no commonality except pointing at soft left neoliberals and being like, those people are really annoying. And that's true. They are really fucking annoying. But I think the fact that the left has not offered a new idea in 50 years or more, I think that because I mean, it's a little complicated because the outward shape of what was leftism, if you think of it in like new left, late 60s, early 70s, the outward shape and rhetoric has become kind of the way that corporations talk to the world, and certainly how they make decisions about content and about in HR. That dialogue is an inherently exclusionary dialogue. It was developed amongst a certain kind of intellectual of a certain kind of privilege, and other people could learn how to speak it, but it is not a dialogue. It is not a dialect, I should say. It is not a dialect that is a dialect which people can learn unless they're in very specific situations, and thus is inherently exclusionary. And the thing is, if you exclude people, they gotta go somewhere. And so people who do this right-wing shit, they can wrap themselves in very true sentiments and use it to further really hideously egregious political platforms. And people are, you know, people are dumb, they're not stupid, which is a distinction. I don't think people, you know, like I think when people are making political choices or choices about who they're going to pay attention to, it's not about a platform. It's about like one or two things, right? And if one of those things is, we're not going to irritate and shame you, that's pretty fucking welcoming.
If we're not willing to say that personhood is attained by degree contingent upon factors like self-sufficiency, then we are left with this idea that personhood is inherent, and all of its attending moral rights and dignities are inherent. Inherent means existing in something as a permanent, essential, and characteristic attribute of that thing. If something is inherent, that means that it belongs to the essential nature of that thing. The idea that our human dignity, our human rights are inherent, our personhood is inherent, this is an idea that lies very much at the foundation of our country. In fact, any notion of human rights depends on this idea. But, and this is just a logical conclusion, if an unborn baby does not have inherent value, then human value itself is not permanent or essential, and thus if an unborn baby does not have inherent value, then neither does anybody in this room.
Hi everyone, this is Nick Toady. Sorry for breaking from the established format, but this is really the simplest way I could come up with to get the necessary information across at this point in the movie. I also find the speaker, Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire, to be deeply unpleasant, and I don't want to listen to him talk. I find his face unpleasant too, so let's just... Okay, so here's what you need to know. Behind the scenes, Jarett and I have spent the past 6 weeks petitioning right-wing media outlets, podcasters, YouTube shows. I even reached out to Fox News without Jarett's knowledge. But our biggest target has been Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire. We reached out to Shapiro personally, but also Andrew Klavan, one of his other podcasters, and Jarett even managed to dig up the private email addresses of the Daily Wire's producers. Other than one polite but fruitless exchange with Andrew Klavan, our efforts have been met with complete silence. So we decided to get more aggressive. We had 2 ideas to try and humiliate a response out of Shapiro. First, we decided to waste $7,500 by placing a full-page ad in Variety of an open letter calling out Shapiro for being a hypocrite and refusing to debate Kobek. There will be more on this later. Second, we saw that Matt Walsh, one of Shapiro's employees at the Daily Wire, was giving a lecture at Cal State LA. We decided to attend this lecture with the intention of having Jarett get up during the Q&A to directly ask why the Daily Wire has been ignoring our messages. We figured that, in the very least, we could put footage of this exchange on YouTube and hopefully generate some buzz. Between that and the letter in Variety, we thought that maybe Shapiro could be pressured into having Jarett on his show. But things did not go as planned. It turns out that we weren't the only people planning to ambush Walsh at this event. You'll see it play out, but basically the room ended up being filled with people from the extremely far right who wanted to condemn Matt Walsh for not being right-wing enough. It turned into that sort of circular firing squad that usually plays out among left-wing people on Twitter. It was a totally surreal experience. Anyway, that should be enough context to keep you from getting lost. I should also apologize again because the footage I shot is only going to continue to get worse the closer we get to the end of this movie. I warned you earlier, but you really have no idea how bad it's going to get. This is your last chance to stop watching.
What I've articulated here is not exhaustive. There are many more arguments I could put forward for all the topics covered, but hopefully you see that at least valid reasons exist to question the mainstream narrative on these topics. And hopefully you see that you need not be a bigot to stand for the traditional, quote-unquote, traditional definitions of life, marriage, and gender. Hopefully we can, in fact, all of us in this room, pledge from here on forward not to shout down arguments, any argument, by simply labeling it. You know, calling someone bigoted is not an argument. Accusing them of homophobia, or racism, or sexism, or transphobia, or any other phobia or ism you can think of, is not an argument. It is a tantrum. It's a way of shutting down debate, not engaging in it. If somebody has really put forth a bigoted argument, you should have no trouble disproving it. It should be very easy to do. If you can't, then perhaps that means there's more to that point of view than you think. Or maybe you're also a bigot. Who knows? So please, let's not be intellectually lazy. Please don't hide behind a fortress of ignorance while flinging labels at your opponents. Let's all try not to win arguments by labeling the opposing argument hate speech. These are the tactics of cowards and fools, and I think we should all be better than that. Thank you guys so much.
Q&A. If you would like to ask Matt a question, please go around the back side and line up. The line starts in the back. When you come up, please stand close to the mic. You can ask one concise question and no follow-up questions, please.
Hello, Matt.
Hi.
As a Christian, how do you get past working for someone who originally contributed to shaming the Covington Catholic kids and by retweeting left-wing attacks, and call Jesus a Jewish rebel who tried to lead a revolt against the Romans and got killed for his trouble?
Wait, you're telling me that my Jewish boss doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God? I'm scandalized by this. I have no idea. As a Christian, how do I justify working for someone who's not a Christian? I find that to be a total non sequitur.
Who blasphemed Christ? That's my main question.
Well, it's not blasphemy. Are you suggesting that everyone? Hold on a second. Are you suggesting that everyone who is not Christian is guilty of blasphemy?
You are a Christian, and you're working for someone who blasphemed Christ, Jesus Christ. He called him a Jewish rebel, just a Jewish rebel who tried to lead a revolt against the Romans and got killed just like other Jewish rebels did. And I'm a Christian, and I just don't see I couldn't see myself.
Okay. So you're not going to work for anyone.
And all right, so maybe start with explaining what we just did.
Tortured our souls. We went to Cal State, LA to see Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire deliver a 45-minute lecture, if you want to abuse the word, about how the left is assaulting reality through its positions on abortion, gay marriage, and transgender people. The connective tissue between the three issues being, as far as I could make out, reproductive rights, or reproduction, not even rights, just the simple fact of reproduction, for whatever reason, is what the man seems most interested in. Followed by a 15-minute Q&A of radical Catholics and white supremacists.
Yeah, and so what did this experience change anything about your thoughts about the Daily Wire?
That's some crazy shit to swim in, that they're in. Yeah, a little bit, in the sense that it makes clear why we have been having as hard a time getting them to pay attention to us in any way, because they must just be getting bombarded not only with stuff from the left, which is what I would have imagined, but with stuff from the fractional right, and I suspect probably more from the fractional right than the left, right? I suspect that whatever this ridiculous project is that we've embarked on isn't a common one from the left, but it must be a common one from the right, you know, and from the fractional right, because what we saw in the Q&A was an argument of degrees. You know, the Matt Walsh is whatever he is, but the people asking him questions seem to be much further to the right than he is. Yeah, I don't know, it kind of made me feel bad for him. I wouldn't want to have to take those questions, and I wouldn't want my shtick to be, well, I'm the guy who goes and gives this lecture and then has to answer questions about European heritage relative to the founding of the US, which is clearly something he's not interested in. He's like really interested in culture issues relative to sexuality. I don't don't think he really cares at all about whether or not white men founded America.
I'm not shouting him down. He can talk.
Refusing the conversation.
No, he can absolutely talk about the Jews all he wants. It's just I have no interest in talking.
I mean, he wouldn't have to talk about that at all. I mean, I feel like these are excuses.
Okay, no, it's just I don't have to sit down and have a formal debate with every idiot who rants about me online. If I did that, I could never do anything else in my life.
Can you see how that would look to some like you're making excuses to avoid the conversation?
Hey, Mr. Wolf.
Hi.
So I am an American whose family has lived here for a long time. I think 5 generations ago, grandfather served in the War of 1812. My grandfather served in World War II, and I just finished up my Army service over in Monterey. Now, all of my lineage is European. I think no one in this room would argue that this country, the pioneers, the grit, the imagination, the brilliance it took was of the European mind. It wasn't the Indian mind, it wasn't the Chinese mind, it wasn't the Japanese hand, it was European. Now,
I don't know what a Chinese mind is, I have to tell you, but I don't know what that is. I don't think minds.
Okay, now my question is this. Japan has a right to stay Japan. China has a right to stay China, right? No one is trying to pick and plug Bangladeshi migrant workers, Indian migrant workers into China, into Japan, and expect them to stay Chinese, to stay Japanese. So my question is, without calling me racist, I don't think you would do that. Why is it wrong to want to preserve our heritage and keep the country that our ancestors founded European?
White Supremacy at Cal State, a letter to Ben Shapiro. Dear Ben, the other day I went to see Matt Walsh, one of your Daily Wire podcasters, deliver a lecture at Cal State Los Angeles. The event was billed as a dissection of the left's attack on reality. I wanted to ask Matt why the Daily Wire, with its rhetoric about a mainstream media that excludes outside opinion, has systematically ignored and dismissed entreaties from my publicity team. All we've asked for is the thing that you say most frightens the left: a debate. I wanted to talk about the issues raised in my book, Only Americans Burn in Hell, just now available in the USA. First published in the UK, Only Americans was instantly crowned by British snobs as a satirical masterpiece, but I've been worried that its language might turn off my fellow cultural Marxists. Like any good leftist, I used my text to push an agenda of forced homosexuality and mandatory heroin addiction for all citizens between the ages of 21 and 65. But I went a little heavy on the potty humor. That's why I wanted to do your show. By appearing on a platform that prides itself on openness and enduring your interrogation of my gossamer-thin logic, I thought that we could achieve a cultural synthesis, and that some books could be sold. Response from your end has been lacking. Before Matt's event, I waited with the filmmaker Nick Toti in a third-floor hallway of Cal State's Student Union. We were approached by a young man. He inquired if we were there to see Matt. I said that this was indeed the case. The young man asked more questions, expressing a disconcerting interest in my presence and how I discovered the event. "This kid's freaking me out," I whispered. "Let's go downstairs." We returned about 20 minutes later. Matt performed in his inimitable style. He linked the left's attack on reality to issues: abortion, gay marriage, transgender rights that, in his opinion, degrade human reproduction. After 45 minutes, the floor was open to questions. I didn't move fast enough to secure a place in line. That stampede of highly motivated young men was too quick for me. The first questioner, holding a plastic rosary and an iPhone, asked Matt to justify working for you. Apparently, at some point, you'd blasphemed against Jesus Christ on social media, a thought crime that disqualifies its offender from distributing W-2s and 1099s. Nothing says Christianity like fretting over money. The minutes ticked on. One of Matt's interrogators was the kid from the hallway. This young man's question hinged on the virtues of the European brain when contrasted with the African brain and the Chinese brain. He demanded that Matt explain why, given this obvious superiority, people believe it immoral to protect the fundamental European context and character of American life. Ben, I don't think it's beyond the pale to suggest that this fellow was what woke op-ed writers would call a white supremacist. Walking back to his obligatory Prius, Toady posed an unwelcome question. "You do realize why that guy talked to us, right?" he asked. Maybe he was worried that we were getting ready to attack reality. "He thought you were a fascist skinhead." "What?" I asked. "Look at your head shaved bald. You're wearing a leather jacket." "But I'm such a Turk," I said. "I'm the living miscegenation decried by Brenton Tarrant, and my pants are made of soft and unmanly linen." "Who's Brenton Tarrant?" asked Toady. "He did the mass shooting of that mosque in New Zealand. His manifesto is about Turkish hordes invading the West and polluting its blood. Those 87 pages of race hate are about me." "Who cares?" asked Toady. The European brain wanted to make friends with a fellow National Socialist. So there you have it, Ben. Because of my extremist position on male pattern baldness, I was mistaken for a white supremacist. I've had better Tuesdays. When I sat down to write this letter, my first inclination was to focus on the hollowness of your rhetoric. I was going to conflate your silence with cowardice, make lame jokes at your expense. Example, I know that you alone bear this universe's heaviest burden. If you don't tweet about the national disgrace of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's footwear, who will? But then it occurred to me, Ben, that this was unworthy of our special connection forged in the fires of Cal State. The European brain taught me that it's no fun when one's extremist positions lead to confusion about white supremacy. Watching you caper and cavort on the internet, I'd never have guessed. But now I know the pain of your every waking day. I've tasted the full Shapiro. No homo. Come on, brother. Put me on your damned show. Jarett Kobek, heroforshapiro@gmail.com.
You know, the only people I know who are just completely non-inclusive and non-diverse are these West Side, completely hardened people who have no, it's my way or the highway.
I mean, one of the things about the Trump election that no one has really figured out a great way to talk about is that election was people who almost never get told no, being told no.
Exactly.
And you know, the visual metrics of that are terrible. Like, you can see how this stuff plays if you're not on the West Side. You know, you can see how terrible it is to have celebrities who are not the brightest bulbs involved in the political discourse. Yeah, I mean, I think in these emails that we have to send their producers mentioning that I'm doing an appearance on the Bret Easton Ellis podcast can only help, because Bret Easton Ellis, God knows how it's happened, has been, you know, like a gay West Hollywood dude with a fucking 40-year younger lover or whatever it is, who's been a good liberal his entire life, through the insanity of the moment has been recontextualized as like some right-wing champion of free speech. And he's been on Ben Shapiro's Sunday show, you know, like, he's in their good graces. I don't know why he wants to be. I don't think it's a great place to be, but it sold a ton of books, you know, and I don't think he's changed. I mean, this is one of his central arguments. He has not changed. The world has changed around him, and he might be like a really famous example of what you were talking about, which is, or we were talking about, which is people go to the right wing because there's nowhere else to go, right? Like, I don't know, but it's, you know, none of it is to shit on him either, because I think he wrote the most important American novel of the last 30 years. It's not his best book, but it is the most important novel. American Psycho, hands down, is the book that predicted the future in every possible regard. And, you know, he's a guy who saw himself as on the left. I don't know how deeply he thought about it, because I don't think those are his concerns, and maybe they don't need to be, right? Like, but he was just a good liberal, and now he's not. So I think the strategy is, since he seems to be in bed with these people, mentioning that I'm booked on his podcast really helps, right? Because it's not an easy thing to get booked on in the first place, and it's weird to be on it. So I don't know. I mean, he's a funny guy. He's like the canary in the coal mine, right? Leave the cat alone.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
No, it's all right. But I actually don't have much else to say about that.
And so you kind of wonder, so we're listening to the media tell us about all of this shit. And I think everyone, as we talked about, their minds have melted over Trump. And then Trump has become part of everyone's narrative. We're talking about it. He hovers over everything. Yeah. And yet, at the same time, I mean, I could not get on... I mean, I did, look, I have to be totally fair and not turn this into some sort of like fucked up thing. I was covered for White by pretty much everyone. Mm-hmm. And I did have a lot of opportunities. The New York Times, and I did a Times talk with them. The Washington Post was super hostile, but we did an interview, and my PR person was guarding me while I was doing it, because I wanted to say some outrageous things, and I wanted to talk about the Washington Post, but I didn't. And yet, when it came down to television, could not get me on anything, except Fox.
I've slowly been developing this like obsession with this idea of like, I want to talk about this book with Ben Shapiro. Mm-hmm. I really want to talk about this book with Ben Shapiro. So we figured out his producer's email addresses, which were not the easiest things to find, and have been emailing them and been trying to do this. Nothing. Just absolutely nothing. Which is like kind of galling, because the entire narrative behind that is like, facts don't care about your feelings, right? This is the place. The mainstream media inherently excludes outside voices. Liberals are afraid to talk to us, blah, blah, blah. In the meantime, all we're doing is reaching out to these dudes, being like, come on, come on, come on. So we came up with this idea a couple of weeks ago that what we would do is run a full-page ad in Variety that was an open letter to Ben Shapiro. Figuring out how to get a full-page ad in Variety, by the way, is like more complicated than dental surgery. Like trying to find the people to talk to in like a dying print publication who know how to get an ad into it. And the whole idea with Variety was like, it's such a debased thing. Like, who reads Variety? That's funny. You can either do it in like the New York Times, where a full page ad is $100,000, which no one has the money for, or you can do it in this really tiny thing that has a certain kind of cachet still in LA. And like all of those dudes are really LA guys. Yeah, I mean, you've been on that show. So like, finished the letter a couple of days ago. We pay for the ad in Variety, or maybe it was last week, I can't quite remember. But today we send the ad, literally today at about 10 a.m. we send the ad in. By about 3, we've got this hysterical call from Variety about how they can't run the ad because it's so, like, all the things that it's talking about are so crazy. I can't remember what the woman said, but it's like, we thought this was going to be an ad for a book, and instead you've sent us a letter about like mass shootings, mosques, and white supremacy. So I don't know. I mean, I would love to do those things. There's nothing I would be more interested in than going on Shapiro's show and talking to Shapiro.
Hello again, everyone. I'm interrupting this time just to let you know that if you were hoping for something to happen, this is it. This is the end of the movie. We never do meet Ben Shapiro or any other prominent right-wing pundits. Bret Easton Ellis is as close as we got. I would apologize again, but you were warned multiple times to stop watching, so this shaggy dog story is as much your responsibility as anyone's. Since you stuck it out to the end, though, here's a little Easter egg for you. I won't say where, but somewhere in this movie there's a backmasked message that, when played in reverse, will actually conjure a demon straight from hell to come and erase the memory of this movie from your brain. But at this point, you might as well finish the movie first. You've made it this far, after all.
And they have they want hits and stuff. And,
well, but I mean, my thought was like, well, wouldn't it be great if I went on and just tanked? Wouldn't it be great for them if Ben Shapiro eviscerated me? I wouldn't be able to show myself in public. He'd have another leftist scalp on the wall. I don't know. It's really interesting. I mean, I did not think in 2019 I would find myself being rejected by Variety for trying to give them a pretty substantial amount of money for a letter about white supremacy.
So I was looking back over some of the earlier footage we did, and at one point we had a mostly useless conversation about Norman Mailer's Armies of the Night.
Oh, right.
And the reason why it's mostly useless was because I just finished reading it and I was excited. So it's mostly just me monologuing about that book, which is completely useless footage because I'm not on camera.
I don't know, given the way that your filmmaking process and output looks, you could do something with it.
Right, yeah, that's true. Well, in that case, it's because my opinions on the book are jejune.
I see.
It's why it's useless. So I want to get your opinions. But there was I put out a sort of a thesis for this misguided effort of ours. comparing it to Mailer et al.'s misguided efforts of, storming the Pentagon.
Right.
And
did I reject that thesis or did I agree with it?
I don't know, but do you think there's anything to that?
It depends. If you are reducing everything to their simplest, most basic idea, which is someone performing a totally and ultimately futile gesture that ends in failure, sure. I think the nature of that gesture on their part, right, which is like this protest at the Pentagon in 1967, partly because it's 52 years ago, but partly because something wasn't as sour in American life as it is now. I suspect those were people who had a much more genuine goal than we did, right? And I mean, it's not to say that I was ingenuine or disingenuous, or that you were disingenuous about this idea that this was possible, because I don't think that was the case at all. And I think probably it would have been possible had the right wing not been in the middle of a racist meltdown and self-cannibalizing circle of knives. That's a mixed metaphor, just like Norman Mailer. But there's a world of difference between the kind of not genuine, that's the wrong word. There's a kind of naivete that people in the mid-60s still had. And that's actually why the Vietnam era was so shocking to everyone, which is there wasn't a built-in assumption that American life was nothing but sold out bullshit. I do not think that either you or I have proceeded from anything like that innocence, right? This is not an exercise in some kind of demonstration of how human goodness can overcome a military-industrial complex. This is like two relatively cynical individuals seeing how cynical something else is. But yeah, they both failed, like they're both failures, and there's some similarity in that.
Yeah, I also had interest at the beginning in the idea that there are certain things that I think if a left-leaning individual is being, honest,
right,
and objective and looking at things, they would have to concede that the right has the moral high ground,
right,
in certain areas. One of them being the issue of free speech and not wanting to shut down things. And so that was part of the appeal at the beginning, was saying, hey, we agree with you on this thing. So who do you think, did we learn anything about that idea from this?
I think they're as full of shit as anyone. They're as disinterested in free speech. And free speech as they've constituted it, right? Like, there's an argument that free speech is just a necessary governmental protection based on the assumption that a plethora of opinions in the public forum ultimately benefit the democracy that we're in. That's not what their idea of free speech is. Their idea of free speech is, I don't know, why can't we insult trans men, right? Why can't we make a healthy debate about why we hate trans people? And like, why don't people want to argue with us? That's ultimately what their conception of free speech is. Why can't I be a dick on Twitter? And why doesn't anyone want to talk to me about being a dick on Twitter? We offered it to them, and we offered it to them in a way that wasn't like we're gonna come shit all over you. I mean, maybe that was the intention, but the actual entreaties were not like that at all, and they were really pretty clear about what we thought was possible, and is exactly what these people go to every college campus saying they can't have, that there's some great quivering leftist horde that's terrified of, standing up to the withering scrutiny of Ben Shapiro's ironclad logic. And, they don't want it, They just don't. It's really clear.
One of the threads that also got lost in this project was the idea of Only Americans as a Christian novel.
Mm-hmm.
And what have we learned as good Christians from all of this?
Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. I don't know. I don't think I've learned anything in that regard. Not to keep giving you unsatisfying answers, but, nothing. I mean, this has been entirely in the realm of business, and business is not an especially Christian-friendly platform to be operating from. I don't know. Have you learned anything as a Christian?